Good evening, and welcome to We're Not Our Hearts Burning daily program for the Easter season. I'm Dr. Joanne Romarsik-Petrowski, a certified lay ecclesial minister in the Diocese of Cleveland, currently serving as the Assistant Director for Newman Catholic Campus Ministry. I'd like to thank the Parish Life Office for inviting me to participate in this series. Today we're moving on from the story of Nicodemus' encounter with Christ to one of what I think is the most known stories in the Bible. A reading from the Gospel of John. Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus raised his eyes and saw that a large crowd was coming to him, he said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" He said this to test him, because he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good are these for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people recline." Now there was a great deal of grass in that place, so the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much as the fish as they wanted. When they had had their fill, he said to his disciples, "Gather the fragments left over, so that nothing will be wasted." So they collected them, and filled 12 wicker baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves that had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, "This is truly the prophet, the one who is to come into the world." Since Jesus knew that they were going to come and carry him off to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain alone. The Gospel of the Lord. I, like many of you, have listened to this story at least 100 times. And like the end of a book you just read, you already know the ending. Jesus blessed the food and fed 5,000 people. Up until today, I missed the hero in this story. To recap, Jesus and his disciples see thousands coming to see and hear him. Jesus' first concern is, how are we going to feed all these people? The adults around him find this an impossible task. Philip points out the obvious, that even with 200 days' wages, we couldn't feed this many people. Then Andrew introduces our hero. There's a boy here with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. Then I imagine he shrugs his shoulders. It wasn't until preparing for today that I even noticed our hero in this story. There's a boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes. Where'd this boy come from? In Jesus' day, it would not have been the custom for adults to look to children for assistance. So I like to imagine that this boy hears that Jesus is coming. Maybe he's on his way to tend the family flock. Maybe his mom packed him a lunch. Maybe that lunch was supposed to last more than a day. Being spontaneous as young people tend to be, the boy deviates from his planned day to go see Jesus. Looking back on my own adolescence and that of the 5 children I've raised to adulthood, I'm reminded of how youth can be spontaneous, how charismatic musical artists and sports figures can draw attention in crowds. I also am aware of the wild abandon and the lack of consideration of the consequences for bobbing and weaving to get to the front row. Back to the boy in our story. He's heard the news that Jesus is coming to town. He has his packed lunch, and now he's bobbing and weaving to get a front row seat. He's so close that he overhears the conversation about feeding the folks. Like so many of the youth in our world, he's young, he's generous, and he's willing to do his part. So I like to imagine that he says, "Hey, I couldn't help but overhear that you're looking for food to feed the people. I have this basket of bread and fish. Will this help?" And in that moment, he surrenders his food for the day to Jesus. And after he surrenders all that he has, Jesus performs a miracle and feeds the 5,000. And in the end, there are actually leftovers. We never hear what Jesus did with the leftovers. He just collected them, 12 basketfuls. I like to think he gave them back to the boy. In surrendering all that he had and letting Jesus use all that he had, what came back to him was even more than he had when our story started. In this story, Jesus demonstrates what can happen when we have a worldview of abundance rather than one of scarcity. In these uncertain times, what gifts do you have that you can surrender to Jesus for the common good? Are you hoarding or sharing your gifts, whether they're your talents or your material goods? Can the adults among us rekindle their youthful optimism, generosity, and wild abandon? Can we surrender our gifts to Jesus so that he can accomplish even more than we ever imagined? Thank you for being here this week, and have a wonderful weekend.